Today we are joined by Claire Alison Hams and Zoe Lambert. Claire Alison Hams was born to Jehovah's Witness parents and raised with the view that Armageddon was just around the corner. Leaving as an adult, she has spent the past several years training as a counselor, embarking on understanding the complexities of recovery as an adult from high control. Claire trained with Dr. Jilly Jenkinson and her post-cult recovery Walking Free workbook model of therapy and works with ex-members of all cultic dynamics. Claire is currently in her third year of her PhD at University of Chester, a phenomenological study entitled Born and Raised Adult Ex-Jehovah's Witnesses in the UK, Experiences of Counseling and of Counselors Who Work with Them. Dr. Zoe Lambert is both a writer and a lecturer in creative writing at Lancaster University. She was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and from an early age, writing has been a rich part of her life. She has published numerous short stories, including the collection The War Tour. She is passionate about facilitating writing and creativity. Zoe is currently writing a memoir about her experiences. Her new personal essay, I'm Having Sex and I Will Die, on nearly overcoming purity trauma, is out via Bio Stories. Thank you for joining us, and welcome Claire and Zoe.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Welcome, everyone, to our presentation on Groups Can Harm, but Groups Can Also Heal. Claire Alison Hams and I are going to be sharing our recent experiences where we've both run support groups for survivors of religious trauma and cultic abuse. And we'd like to share some of the things that we've learned from those experiences.
We decided to come together to collaborate after meeting at ICSA last year and realising that there was a big need for more resources for survivors. And so I already had in plan a 6-session group that I was going to run in September. And Zoe and I talked together at ICSA and floated the idea that Zoe had already of beginning a programme of writing for Wellbeing. So because we both had interest in running groups, we decided to get together and do the second Writing for Wellbeing as a joint project. Well, I would support Zoe as a therapist in the process. So we're going to talk about both of the groups today and what we've learned from our experiences. A little bit about me, first of all. I'm a therapist in the UK. I am an ex-Jehovah's Witness. I left in my 30s. I'm second generation. My parents converted, and I was born and raised in that environment. I left and I decided around about the same time as leaving to train as a therapist, as a counsellor. And I completed some psychodynamic training and qualified and went on to do my graduate degree. But I realised that in order to work with ex-members, people like me, I needed some further training because I realised in my own therapy during my training, therapists don't always understand the complexity. So I went on in 2022 to train in the second cohort of Dr. Jilly Jenkinson's Walking Free model of post-cult counselling. And I found that was really, really incredibly helpful for me in my recovery, but also in how I work with my clients. And I've gone on to use that model with my clients in the last 2-3 years, and that's been really successful in the work that I do. I also started to do some PhD research back in 2022, and that's looking specifically at Jehovah's Witnesses who were born and raised and left as adults and how they experience therapy, because I recognise there was a need for doctoral research to understand this better. So it's just UK-based research, but I'm really enjoying finding out more about that area.
And I am a third generation ex-JW. Both those sets of grandparents joined in the 1950s. And I first left and tried to leave in my early 20s in the noughties. And I managed to somehow didn't end up being disassociated. So I didn't experience that full shunning process, just, mild forms of it. I have a PhD in creative writing. I'm currently a lecturer in creative writing at Lancaster University. Sometimes I manage to publish things, though not that often. And I've also been a carer for 20 years for my believing JW mother until she died in 2020. And it's only since her death have I been able to really process what I went through. And I feel like finally actually find my own voice. Yeah. And
Yeah.
to add that part of my work as a over the years has been community-based writing workshops. I've worked with lots of different vulnerable groups, and this has developed more and more into writing for Wellbeing. And this is a current thing. I've been working with different groups with these people who experience chronic pain, survivors of sexual assault, other vulnerable groups. And I realised there is very little, if anything, in the UK specifically for survivors of religious trauma. So this is where I'm directing my energies at the moment.
Hopefully that gives the overview of Zoe and I's experience and what we wanted to bring together. We both happen to love cats too, so that was a bonus. We find pet therapy very useful in our recovery. So I decided to approach Face to Faceless, which is a subsidiary of Humanists UK, a charity here in the UK. And Face to Faceless is the part that really focuses on supporting people that have left high control religion. And I have done some voluntary work with them before, and also a collaborative workshop last year with another therapist. But I approached them with a model that I had come up with of doing 6 sessions of a kind of a psychoeducational support group where we would choose specific topics and have different therapists presenting each topic to a closed group, and to bring some insight into specific topics that I have found in my client work that we struggle with in our recovery. So Face to Faceless took on board my proposal, and we prepared to run that in September last year. I found a willing co-facilitator, another therapist who is from ex-evangelical background, a male therapist. So we decided to work together. That's Chris, and he's not with us today, but he's happy for me to share what we experienced together. It was new to both of us to do this, and we hadn't worked together, so we spent some time preparing beforehand what we wanted the content to be. And also what we did was we pre-met all of the potential participants for around half an hour on Zoom, and had a discussion with them so that we could find out more about them and why they were motivated to want to enrol on the 6-session course, and what stage they were at in their recovery process, so that we had a greater insight into who would be in the group. We had a maximum of 10 to keep it small. I think it was occasionally less than that because people couldn't come to all the sessions. We had an agreement that if people missed 2 consecutive sessions, that they wouldn't be able to continue, because we wanted that group continuity. And also we said it was really important for everybody to come to the first session. So we did have somebody that had missed the first session because they forgot the date, and we said unfortunately they then couldn't continue in the course, because it was really important for that initial group bonding to happen, for trust and safety to begin to build. So we sought out therapists that were in my sort of network of therapists that work with ex-members of high control in some way, shape or form, and approached them and asked them what topic they would like to present to the group. And I knew that some of them had specific areas that they had an interest and specialism in. So we came up with this model of 6 topics. Just to give you an overview, here are the 6, well, actually 5 topics that we chose, and we had an ending session where everything that we talked about within the other 5 sessions could be discussed, and we did a creative piece just to give everybody a bit of creative exploration to think about what they had been impacted by in the other 5 sessions. So we did an introductory course, session where we looked at doorways to recovery, very symbolic imagery, and we had an ex-Mormon therapist who presented that. It was really well received by the group, because it was really thinking about doors closing and doors opening. So when we're on this journey, there is this ending process, but there's also this new life and new beginning process that we are engaging with, and that can be both, amazing and terrifying at the same time, because we're facing a world that we haven't had a part of before, and the emotions that go with that can be very diverse. So we looked at different aspects of doors to recovery. We also looked at grief and loss in the context of being ex-members, so thinking about shunning, thinking about ostracism, but also thinking about how our belief systems around death and afterlife may have been impacted, and how we're actually grieving relationships where people are still alive. They haven't died. We haven't died, very much alive. And yet there was this grief and sense of huge amount of wound around loss. And we really explored that in a very deep way in that session. Boundaries and assertiveness, finding a voice, something that we all struggle with when we leave, because we haven't been taught to have boundaries. We've been taught to be confluent, mixed in with the group ideologies, and to be submissive and conforming. And so learning to be able to say no, learning to find out what we like and don't like, and what we want to do with our lives as an autonomous individual is a very new concept. So we explored that. Isolation, loneliness, loss of communities, in some ways linked to grief, but we were talking about how do we build connection when we haven't had to do that before. We've had an instant community that we've always been part of. Sexuality and relationships, really powerful topic, which we really found was received really well, because there isn't a lot of talk in the UK, certainly, around this topic of sexuality and relationships when we leave high control. And there certainly was a feeling that we need to talk about that more, and we need to understand how we can embrace talking about that more and strip it of the shame that often surrounds these kind of topics, around an aspect of purity culture that we're left with, often the residue of that. And so this was a really exploratory experience to see what worked, what didn't work, and some lessons that we got from that were sort of really understanding the emotional toll that that can take, not just on the participants of being vulnerable and coming into a group. And obviously the title of our session today, groups can harm. We know that all of us have been harmed by some form of group, but also the healing process that can happen when we trust being able to come together and have a shared lived experience. So we were able to understand the emotional toll that that can take on both participants, but also on facilitators. So myself and Chris talked a lot about how tired we felt after the session and the need for self-care when we were running something like this. 6 sessions continuously every week was quite a lot when we were both running a full practice, working with different clients. For me, particularly working with a lot of ex-member clients on a day-to-day basis in my working week, and then coming into the group on a Saturday, 10 till 12, even though it was 2 hours, it was intense. So the real need for self-care as facilitators, and looking after our own experiences and what it might bring up for us when we're working with a group. But also recognising that in any group there's going to be individuals that are at different stages of recovery, and how important it is to be mindful of each person in the group experience, because for some people, some of the topics were very new and they were very raw. And for other people, they thought about this before and it wasn't quite so new. So being really aware, and that's where the pre-meets did help us to have some idea of where people were at, really aware of how different things land differently for each member of the group, and really being aware of perhaps if cameras went off, or, people needed to just take some time out because something had come up for them emotionally that they needed to process. So really helpful, and we were able to feed this back to face-to-face lists, and we were able to give them some really good ideas about what we could do going forward if we were to run another group, and we hope that one day that will be the case. So we certainly picked out these 2 areas, grief and loss and sexuality were 2 topics that in the feedback we were told there could be more resources for this, there could be more spaces to be able to discuss this. And so that's useful for us to know going forward how we could include that and expand on that to make that discussion even deeper than it was just on a one session basis. We know that therapists need more resources. We've got a lot of ex-member therapists, but we've also got a lot of therapists working with ex-members who haven't got lived experience. And they often come to us and they ask, how do I work with this client base? And at the moment in the UK, there isn't enough research around how therapists work with this client base. So we need more research, we need more understanding, and then we can be able to provide more resources and more forms and ways of therapy that attract different people, different clients, because we know we all resonate with different ways to recover. So that kind of brought me into connecting with Zoe, because we talked about how creativity is something we need to embrace in our recovery. We've often been very stifled in terms of play, especially when we've been born and made. So Zoe really wanted to delve into writing for wellbeing. So I'll hand over to Zoe to talk a bit more about that.
Hi, yes. I've always believed in writing as something that can help you grow as a person. And the concept of writing for wellbeing is growing in many different contexts in terms of mental health and health, and very specific contexts, like as I mentioned earlier. This is my cat who is taking part in today's recording.
Fighting.
Yeah, this is Tinky. So yeah, and there is in the UK very little, if not nothing, of this kind of workshop for survivors of religious trauma and cultic abuse. I feel like we are very much in the UK a hidden demographic. There is some great stuff happening in the US. I'd like to mention the wonderful work, for example, of Jurat Boulian and her support and writing workshops. But in the UK, not much. So I thought, I want to change this. And there is also a big growing amount of research on how writing can have a powerful impact on mental health and play a positive part in recovery from trauma and in maintaining well-being. That research is growing. It's an interesting field, and I've been tapping into it. So for me, though, I realize I've always used writing for well-being. I was an avid diary keeper as a teenager, even when I was still a believer, and it became an important part for me of how I unpicked my faith, how I began to gain a voice, understand myself as someone who is unique and outside of the doctrine I'd been brought up with. And in my family as well, though I was third generation JW, my family were also quite big readers, and I was extremely creative child. So I was allowed to be creative in certain ways within limits. Don't go overboard. But I was allowed a little bit more leeway, I think, than some other Jehovah's Witnesses are. Though when I strayed, that writing became a way in which I was controlled. I had a diary my mother read more than once, and it was used as a form of shame and control. So I both experienced the problems of what happens when you write things down, evidence, but also how empowering it can be. And so my goal now is to really share that with others and to create a space where writing can heal and hopefully help them. So there is a growing understanding and acknowledgement that well-being, this concept of how you feel, how you are, is a really important part of exiting religious and high control groups, due to the fact that our concepts are compromised, and this contributes to reduced well-being. So writing can help manage feelings such as guilt and shame and fear that one can experience when exiting. There is some great research out there. A favorite of mine, which has nothing to do with religious trauma. It's called Your Brain on Ink, a workbook on neuroplasticity in a journal ladder. And this shows how writing can change our brains. It can change how our brains think, or it can help deepen and make new connections. And this, I think, is really important for survivors of religious trauma. This realization that you don't have to be stuck forever, and that this concept of neuroplasticity is that you can change patterns, feelings, ways of thinking and behaving. So this idea of neuroplasticity, and writing being self-directed can be a really empowering way that survivors of religious trauma can develop healthier, more resilient thinking, which can supplement, I think, therapy. They also argue they can actually enjoy writing without always necessarily writing about trauma. So when we think about writing and religious trauma, we think we've got to write what happened. And I think that's an important part of it. But there's also a lot of things that you can do with writing that are about the present moment and future orientated work. So I will be showing how these can work in a workshop in a minute. So it can also help as well with how we understand our experience, how we reflect on it, help create a sense of our narrative through writing, understanding ourselves as a person in motion. And the idea of reflecting and writing about what you've been through can help you grow and gain new insights. And I think, this is the work of therapy, but there's sometimes very particular detailed insights that can happen through your own writing as well. So this is the little mini course. It was a pilot course that I ran in November 2024 along with Claire. And at that point, I could only really manage 3 weeks with my schedule. So I thought it would be a taster, see how we go, with 3 sessions geared towards beginning writing, then exploring through writing, and then continuing writing afterwards, with a mixture of exercises, which I will detail in forthcoming slides. I really wanted to open up journaling and free writing as a tool for people to use so that they might begin to build a writing practice that can empower them beyond the course. So I drew on some of the current research in writing for wellbeing, in how to ground the participants in the present moment, the ways in which you can use sentence stems to encourage new writers, and as well as trying to adapt these exercises specifically for survivors of religious trauma. So I was kind of rewriting what was out there and gearing it towards the experiences that the participants had had. So it drew a lot on my own story and the ways I'd learned, which isn't universal. And I discovered there were many ways in which what I knew was limited. And that experience of the pilot workshop opened me up to the challenges other people had. But I really wanted it to be a space of creativity, to play and to imagine, to foster growth and autonomy and a sense of self. So I really wanted to draw on some of the skills I have as working as a lecturer for 20 years, more than 20 years now, but honing those for other people that had experienced things the way I had. And I felt it was really important to not do this on my own. I'm not a trained therapist, and working with Claire, I felt was essential to create a safe space for everybody. I really liked the idea of it being participant-centered. So what I realized in the sessions was that at first I assumed everybody would be a raging atheist like me. And that's not the case at all. And in our meetings beforehand, when we met and chatted with everyone just to see how they were, and I discovered that some participants had experienced church-based abuse, but didn't necessarily want to go on a deconversion faith transition. They wanted to deal with this abusive experience, but not necessarily think about it in a cultic way. So that kind of gave me ideas and ways of opening up the exercises to make sure that they were inclusive, and realizing, my job isn't to deconvert or assume or expect them to be at any kind of point in their journey, and to allow that space to be a place for self-discovery at their own pace. So not a space of judgment, but a space of creating a sense of curiosity and opening it up for them so that it's as safe as possible. Yeah, Claire it was so pleased to work with Claire. In her wisdom and experience, she suggested we also meet with each of the participants beforehand. First, this felt like an awful lot of work, but it was so valuable and a necessary part, because it made sure that that we could check and talk with them, and see that they're not in such a vulnerable place where dropping into a writing course might actually be harmful instead of helpful. Get to know them and find out what their particular needs are and what they wanted to get from the course, and check that they had a support network in place, and that they also were mindful that writing will bring up intense emotions, not always intentionally as well, and the course could be emotionally challenging. So during those meetings, we also realized that actually it had another benefit as well, and that was for the participants. It meant they could get to know us. It helped them feel less anxious and nervous about the course. It helped them have more confidence starting it. And in general, I think the pre-meetings benefited everyone. What became a really important part of it wasn't what I intended as well, was that actually the community of 10 people online who had different ages, different backgrounds, came from different groups, some XJW, some ex-evangelical, Mormon, and some other smaller cults as well, from the UK, Europe, and US, that there's this wonderful diversity of people. And suddenly we had this community, and sharing stories became really, really important. I planned a check-in of 20 minutes in the first session, and it actually took 45 minutes, almost an hour, for everyone to say hello. And I hadn't realized how important that would be, that as well as a writing workshop, suddenly for many of them to be with others and hear each other's stories was very powerful, and in itself very empowering. Within this setting, I devised the writing exercises, but we also included some psychoeducation from Claire, and we included some concepts of grounding techniques. Claire, would you like to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, we wanted to talk about the mind-body connection and how trauma is in our body. And so if we are triggered, if our brain pattern matches to something that we've experienced before we felt really unsafe, then we wanted to give the group techniques that they could use to ground themselves, which is to bring yourself back into your body and to realize that you're not going through that same traumatic experience. So we used the five senses, very simple concept of just, thinking about what can you engage with your five senses that will bring you back into a sense of groundedness and being back in your body. And we talked a lot about how we wanted them to give themselves space after the session for this, because we were aware that we were opening up some, past memories and some wounds around that. And it was important to have this aspect, a therapeutic aspect to the group. It wasn't therapy, but it was a therapeutic psychoeducational aspect that would give them some tools in the toolbox.
Yeah, I think that was a really important part of it, because We wanted to make sure that they were they had tools and resources to manage the end of the course, to, you know, go offline and spend the rest of their Saturday. And so I think all these little extra techniques, I think, help them be equipped for that and become resourceful as well. And then there was also the psychoeducation around are you narcissistic enough, which was really, really useful as well. And Claire talked about the importance of finding a voice, but the balance of healthy narcissism in post-cult recovery as well. In my other contexts, have developed grounding exercises that bring the writers into the present moment through using objects or pieces of material. And this kind of somatic approach, I think, is really great if you're writing about or exploring any kind of difficult experience. It draws on the grounding stuff of the senses, but within the writing exercise itself. I asked, because we're online, I asked the participants to find some material from their own room, which worked. And in the future, I'd quite like to try and create a pack of sensory objects for participants, so they receive things to hold and touch as part of their writing exercises to help that grounding process. Another aspect was the importance of always writing into the present moment, so bringing everybody back to the now, and starting and beginning with this sensory writing that is all about the now. And I like to kind of make sure we're always reminded that we are survivors and we are here and we are safe. And that as part of the workshop, I felt was really important to help make sure that the participants weren't taken somewhere emotional and difficult and left there. So one thing I realized during it was that for some participants, their groups had used writing against them. It had been a tool of control and indoctrination. Some had been forced to keep religious journals and diaries of their faith. And there were other experiences where writing had been difficult and disempowering. I had never experienced this or heard of it, and it was a little bit of a shock to me, and I didn't anticipate it. But it was a really useful thing to learn and anticipate in the future, because it really helped me change some of my exercises. I found that when they were in the group online, they felt safe to write, but when they went home, because I set them a few daily journaling exercises, that there it became more difficult. So I altered my exercises at home and made them more supportive, used a thing called sentence stems, where you begin a sentence and they finish it, just to make that writing at home more secure and supportive. One other thing I learned through this process was how important it is in a writing workshop with survivors of religious trauma is about enabling choice and autonomy. So I reiterated all the time that they did not have to do these exercises, and I would give them options as well. If an exercise triggered a memory that they didn't feel ready to deal with, then they could go in another direction. They didn't have to go there if they didn't want to. And that is such an important part, I think, that they understand that they have that choice now. This is a group that is about creating choice and autonomy. And I also asked them to always pay attention to how they felt in their body and to take notice of this. And if they felt sensations and emotions in their body that were difficult, to note that and to react accordingly and not do an exercise if they didn't want to. My goal was to gently go a little bit towards their story. Not completely, because it's only 3 weeks, and also to go in sideways and use the somatic approaches. So I devised a writing exercise that drew on the emotions wheel, which in therapy you might be familiar with, and the color wheel. that you will be familiar with in colour theory. But using these two wheels to devise an exercise that triggered writing around an emotion and a colour. And this let them go into the past in a way they weren't expecting, and in a way that remained somatic. And the next week, I drew on Girette Boulion's concept of snapping, and got them to write about when they saw things differently, when they realized something was up, or they began to question their abuse or their faith or whatever it was that they wanted to think about, but in a very gentle, small way. Another aspect I think is important for writing for wellbeing is future-orientated writing. As an XJW, I cannot picture the future. I just have problems with short-term planning, long-term planning. So I thought this might be something that could be helpful for others, whether they had that thing exactly as I did or not. And future planning for trauma survivors more generally is a question. So we ended the course on that, imagining a future that's different. And this was such a wonderful moment because it led to very positive realizations by the participants, one even imagining a complete new career path for him. So we really wanted this to be a group that healed, and it fostered healthy relationships. We discussed and thought about Gilly Jenkinson's ideas around positive groups rather than damaging ones. So aiming for independence, encouraging questioning, encouraging decision-making and autonomy, and that we were also accountable. So I did multiple feedback forms. I also asked them, any issues, please email me, or any questions. And I also, for me, what was really important was making the course affordable. There was a small fee, but it was very, very tiny. And that is something I want to continue through applying for university funding to continue this work. So I can both pay consultants who are going to be part of it, like Claire, but also keep it affordable. I think there's too many charlatans around, and I want this to be accessible and not something that people can't access because of their financial issues. Yes. Connecting to what Claire said about her group, finally, I want to end with thinking about mindful facilitation. As survivors ourselves, our trauma continues. We are still on our own journeys. We are still have our own work to do that's being done. And for me, what's been an important part of my own healing is acknowledging that there's no magical moment where I'll just be a brand new person. So part of this, running this course, I knew beforehand it would be challenging, and the only way to do it in a sustainable way for me is to pay attention to what comes up in myself, my own body, my reactions. So we organized a session with Gilly Jenkinson, a supervisory session that's taken from the model that therapists use after the course, just to think through some of the things that had arisen. And for me, it was about my moral perfectionism. If something goes wrong, I panic, I feel shame, I worry, but in an excessive way. My boundaries are still quite permeable. And I was at some moments hypervigilant, especially in the first session. So I was very concerned about their well-being, that this was going to be helpful and not harmful. But that came in my body in this panic, and I was like, inside, I was like this. So having space to talk that through, think about where it comes from, and what the belief system that makes me think and react like that, my rescue tendencies, want everybody to be okay, wanting to jump in, check too much. And I think calming all that down was really important. And I did having someone to bounce off and talk that through with Claire, who was very wise and very reasonable, was essential. And then having the kind of decompression space with Jilly was really, really helpful. And continuing, I think, for me to do this work, I have to pay attention to my own well-being at the same time, and my own reactions to what is happening. Yes, that's everything.
So it was good to just review what we've done together and for me to talk a bit about my succession group. There was a lot of learning for both of us. No.
Mhm. Yeah, it was, but it's been really wonderful. And it's the kind of work we want to continue and
Mm.
share and build. I'm currently applying for funding to run a longer course of 5 sessions where I uh, can not myself, but the university funding will pay for consultants like Claire, hopefully also Jarette Bouillon, to really develop this work. And in the future, perhaps create a pack of resources so that it can be disseminated more widely and be a resource for people other than just us running it in the future. So yeah, I have plans. So definitely appreciate any feedback and thoughts and suggestions for that plan. So yes, I welcome all questions after this talk.
Yes, equally, the work that Face to Faceless does, just like to highlight, that I was able to run my succession course through them, and they are advancing more and more in what they're able to offer. They're also seeking funding, and they do run a helpline now for people who have left high control religion. So we're going to be seeing, I hope, more collaborative work with therapists and more offerings of support through organisations like that. So it's really good to see institutions and organisations, charities getting on board and supporting us to do this work. It's good.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye for now. Bye.